Are we good? All right. Well, welcome back, everybody. My name's Phil Englert. I'm with the Health ISAC. With me today is Melton, Jay, Marcus, and Michael. We're going to talk about embedded devices, IoT devices in the healthcare environment, right? The challenge there is the healthcare environment is, IoT medical devices interact with the environment. The environment is very often a patient, so it adds a human element. It adds a very emotional element to the entire thing of risk management in there. So I think we'll start here, and just quick, if you want to talk about who you are and what you do.
Hello, everyone. I am Meltem Osoy. I work at Intuitive Surgical, the company that makes the Da Vinci. We make surgical robots, and I'm in the product security team. I do work on securing the Da Vinci robot.
I'm Jay Radcliffe. I work for Insulet. They make the Omnipod insulin pump. I'm a product security officer there. I've been doing offensive security for a little over 25 years, 8 years of that in the medical device space.
My name is Marcus Richardson, and I'm the president of Somerset Recon, a small consulting firm in San Diego. We largely focus on the combination of embedded wireless technology, hardware, security systems. Done medical testing for over 7 years and embedded security testing since 2012. Found a lot of vulnerabilities in medical devices, worked with vendors trying to fix them. And also my prior job, I was working at the Department of Veteran Affairs doing penetration testing for medical networks as well as medical devices and various web and cloud systems.
Hi, my name is Michael. I am on the Healthcare Technology Management Security team at Kaiser Permanente. Our team primarily focuses on hardening the different device types in our environment by applying security controls.
So, Jay, you were one of the early patient researchers, right, in this that kind of activated the FDA into the cybersecurity space. So maybe if you want to lay a little bit of groundwork on how you got started, what that meant.
Yeah. So I grew up in a very technological family. My dad was a computer person and a radio person. So I've grown up with that all my life. I thought I was just doing a fun little project with my insulin pump back in 2010, 2011. And then I thought I would be giving a little talk at Black Hat, and it turned into something much, much larger than that. I've been a type 1 diabetic since the age of 22. So I've always had one of these things. I've got one attached to my arm, the Omnipod. So to me, I've always just been taking things apart and learning how they work and learning how to make them do things they're not supposed to do. So that was just a natural extension. And if it's keeping me alive, I definitely want to know it's secure. So in 2011, I published on the Medtronic device. In 2016, I published on the Animas by Johnson & Johnson insulin pump. And now I work for an insulin pump manufacturer, trying to make sure that, these devices are safe for people to use. And, we're going to trust these things to keep our children and grandparents and parents alive. I want to make sure that they're safe.
Yeah, very good. Very good. And, that's one technology, the GCM pumps, right? And Mike, you work in a large healthcare organization, right? And it's a vast amount of technology. So describe what that environment is like from an equipment perspective.
Yeah, it's pretty challenging. As you can imagine, there's tons of different device types, right? So you can't just, look at a device and apply, standard set of security controls. You really have to, be careful with what you're doing. The way we do that, right, is we work with manufacturers, such as Intuitive, to really learn about the device capabilities, right? Understand, what they can and can't do. We have a standard set of controls that we look at for every device type. Right. After we do an assessment on a particular device, right, we understand, which controls can be applied, which controls can't be applied. And, we kind of go from there. For the ones that can be applied, we test those controls. Sometimes they may be already implemented. So, in that case, we would validate that those controls are already implemented out in the field. And then from testing, we go on to deployment, right? If testing doesn't negatively affect the device, then, we deploy it, to our devices in production, really carefully.
Nice. So you have a test environment, which is very rare in healthcare, so that's quite fortunate.
Yeah, I mean that's one of the challenges. Another challenge too. We have some test environments, but as you can imagine, right, some device types are very costly. So we don't, have those. We don't have that test environments for some of the things, right? So it does take careful planning with service delivery and our business partners. To get time with those devices, as you can imagine, they're being used pretty frequently. So for some devices, it's easier than others to do testing on. For some, it's really challenging and really time consuming for sure.
So yeah, absolutely. And just to talk a little bit about how complex it is, right? There's pressure gauges that they slide up through arterial blood vessels, right, that are about the size of a small paperclip, that can measure the changes in how well your heart is operating, right up through positron emission technology, right? Scanners that are using annihilation collisions to generate images to identify where cancer is. So in 2022, Congress granted the FDA statutory authority over cybersecurity for the first time. Before that, it was just safety. And while they knew that there was a link between safety and cybersecurity, it wasn't a clean line. It was a lot of gray space that was argued about, talked about for years and years. So since that's happened, Melton, as a manufacturer of a very amazing and complex, technology, tell us, how your company's responding to the FDA requirements a little bit, and also what that means to Michael, right? What he's asking for, how that changes your relationship with your customers.
Right. I think maybe I should describe what Da Vinci is just a little bit. So it's a robot that allows surgeons to do laparoscopic surgery in a robotic way, meaning that it has, it's a big device. And it's expensive too. And there's a reason for it, right? So there's a piece of it that goes next to the patient that actual instruments go into. And then there's a piece of it that surgeon sits and views the instrument's actions and uses a joystick to be able to operate on the patient. So that means that you don't have to do, open surgery. You don't have to use this kind of really hard to operate legacy laparoscopic surgery tools. It makes the outcomes of the surgery really well, because people get better faster. And then the surgeons don't get that tired so that they can do more surgery. So it's, win-win for both sides. So it's amazing technology. It's amazing. So I've been working at Intuitive for 6 years. Before that, I worked at Intel as a researcher. So being on the both sides is a very, very interesting experience. So when you go to the production side of the things, the environment changes a lot, right? So as you mentioned, how do we deal with the FDA guidances? And that's why actually my team exists. It came later than the robot itself, as you would imagine, when it was forced, I shouldn't say that, but we were required to do the FDA cybersecurity risk analysis and the documentation for the FDA submissions. But so it kind of goes through what we do is to kind of go back and look at the guidance. Okay, what do you need to do? You have to have authentication. You have to have authorization. You have to have the firmware updates. It has to be secure. It has to be done in the right way. And if something goes wrong, you have to have your logs and a bunch of other stuff, thanks to you guys, that you guys defined in the guidance. And that's what we follow in our implementation. And we communicate this to our customers properly through MCSD and M2SD. I'm sorry.
MDS squared.
Thank you. That's how we communicate the implementation and the details of what the device is capable of and what security mitigations are on there.
Very good. Yeah, a challenging job.
Very much so.
Yeah. So very good. So that takes us to, the FDA defined a secure software development lifecycle, right? And in that they're saying do a threat model, right? Understand what the threats are. Understand what those risks are, right? To develop or select components or controls to put in place and then test them to show that they're effective, right? And that leads us to Marcus, right? So that's what he's doing. So tell us how that's changed since the FDA has kind of stepped in, and then talk a little bit about, like the common stuff that you're seeing, the mistakes that are repeated, and how the industry may be maturing.
Sure. So, first off, I'd like to say, when I come to work every day, I feel really grateful because we get to hack embedded devices, find flaws, and when we find those flaws in embedded devices or medical devices, we get a large impact. Some of those could be, potentially causing patient harm, life-saving, critical information. And I think that, to be fair to the FDA, while it was a slow process in getting the new guidance developed, the new final documentation, I think 2023 that came out, actually is doing a lot more. Folks who are hardware hackers here, you have to have UART disabled, JTAG protections, a wide variety of authentication, authorization, good crypto, digital signature verification, or at least protection against malicious firmware from getting on the system, wide variety of encryption in transit, some of the flaws historically identified by researchers such as Jay, radio communication that was unencrypted, poor authentication, and you're starting to see a lot more of this. And I think that for us, our testing life cycle, we start out with going for low-hanging fruit. So it could be outdated vulnerabilities, such as the researchers at TrapX discovered with MedJack, some of the older systems, MS0867 on some MRI machines that were actually infected real medical devices to maintain persistence. So we'll go for those, and then we'll go down the gamut. We'll try to extract firmware, we'll try to reverse engineer it, we'll try to figure out vulnerabilities or have source code. And then, other things like buffer overflows, heap overflows, use after freeze, and other different cryptographic attacks, weaknesses there. So we'll test for a variety, and then some vendors will actually go beyond the FDA specifications and invest even more. We'll do side channel analysis, looking for different power, rails that are exposing keys, or voltage fault injection, or even decapping chips and delayering and get all the way down to the bare dies to extract firmware optically or via various mechanisms. So do a lot of different types of testing. I think that over time it's improving, and I hope to see the FDA with the next release go even further to help folks out there, because it really does make a difference.
So amazing, good stuff. And I'm not going to tell you not to hack medical devices. I'm not going to tell you to go hack medical devices. The one thing that I do see in coordinated vulnerability disclosures all the time is if you are going to get into that medical device space, you want to make sure that you do it in a safe manner so that you do not ever cause any patient harm, right? So Jay, let's talk about, we were talking about earlier, right, how the threat surface has increased as devices have gotten more connections. We're taking data off of med devices, putting it on our phone, sending it to the cloud, managing it, sending it to multiple places, regurgitating it back for clinical use, as well as doing analysis and AI for, let's say, population health management. So talk a little bit about that if you can.
Yeah, this is something that's really become super popular, which I'm very thankful for. So for example, I've got this little pod, gives me medicine all the time. And it talks to my cell phone and talks to the cloud. Well, think about if you have a child. Now you can monitor their blood sugar. You can monitor their medicine remotely. Before that, you couldn't do that. It was just an isolated little bubble. Well, but now we've got an Android phone. We've got a cloud. We've got a pod. We've got all these things that are talking to each other. And now that much attack surface has really grown. I'll give you a very short story that just happened. So we use Android phones in our controller, right? So you have an Android phone, and Google Play has a Google integrity check to make sure that you're not doing anything evil, right? And to make sure you're patching stuff. And I think we can all agree that we could say, hey, if you haven't patched your Android device in the last year, you're probably not secure. Here's the problem, though. Right, is that if we detect that you haven't patched your Android phone and the Android phone is the only way you can give yourself medicine, what do we do? Do we block you from using the app because we think maybe something malicious is going on? Well, now we've just stopped you from being able to give your child medicine. We're putting the burden on patients, on 2-year-olds and 10-year-olds and teenagers to patch their devices. We can't do that in giant corporations with hundreds of millions of dollars. How are we supposed to be able to put that burden onto non-technological people, maybe grandparents, maybe parents, maybe children? So it's a really difficult balance of how do we assure security? How do we make sure you're patching your stuff, right? But at the same time, we have to find a way to do it in such a way where children could do it. That's a very difficult way to balance that. And then on top of that, look at all the surface area. Are they responsible for the cloud too? Are we going to make sure that, 5-year-olds are being able to do two-factor authentication, use Google Authenticator, and maybe a 10-digit PIN so they can get into their pump to give themselves medicine? So it's a difficult question to answer when we look at the attack surface, and we could say, yeah, even simple things like patching become not so simple.
Yeah, so you're talking about scaling up and down the human condition, if you will, right, from age perspective. And what does that look like from a large healthcare perspective, right, where you're scaling hundreds of hospitals with, tens, maybe even 100 kind of different departments, and then thousands of, ancillary care locations, physicians' offices, diagnostic centers, and such?
Yeah. So patching is, a big part of what we do. There's obviously, a lot of unsupported applications and OSs out there. And so, really it comes down to having really good, inventory of your data. Having good data integrity, knowing, what's out there, who owns them, what they're connected to, right? You need that kind of landscape, right? And so there's, different tools you can use to kind of identify those over the network. For some of the devices that, don't have that kind of remote management capabilities, it does take a manual effort, boots on the ground to go and see, what you have where, and then, make sure you have all that data, right? The second piece, right, is the patching piece, right? So, it really comes down to, strategy and coordination within, all the departments that you mentioned. The remote management tools, like I mentioned, makes it, a lot easier, right, to do things in bulk remotely, as you can imagine, right? You still have that coordination piece, especially in a clinical function environment, right, where you got to make sure the device is not in use, or you need to schedule that time to patch them, right? So remote management tools can help us do that. For the other devices that don't have those capabilities, right, it is that kind of boots on the ground coordination within all those departments, and all that stuff kind of has to be planned before, right? And so that coordination strategies is a big part of patching.
Right. So the amazing thing, right? The challenge with cyber is that it's an ever-changing world, right? This is not an engineering problem. It's a human nature problem. And we saw plenty of display of that today, where folks are finding new ways to uncover vulnerabilities in devices, right? So how does that, from a manufacturing perspective, Melton, how do you approach that? And then how do you respond to that?
Right. I think, as you guys all mentioned, when you put a device out there, you become kind of responsible for it too. And, so it is in bunch of hospitals, and it's working on its own. We enable the remote software updates, right? You can enable it for maybe 90% of your devices, but 10% of them, the hospital doesn't want to, for some reason, connect their devices to the network, for example. Okay. What do we do now? I cannot go. Either we are going to send people to update the device, but then you need to work with the hospital. They need to, allow you to do that. And also you have your legacy older robots. That becomes another headache. I'm sure it's like a common problem in all of our lives. So, your brand new robot does everything, remote software updates, all secured, encrypted, beautiful. But you have older ones, so you want to fix them too. But how are we going to do that? We may be able to enable something for it, but then that takes a lot of work. And then, are they going to be used for a long time? And this becomes all like a balance of the cost and the security and the patient safety. Of course, that's like the patients first, right? That's our motto. And security, without the security, there is no patient safety really. So, that's why it becomes a very challenging job. So what we do is to, like I mentioned, the more, we enable the remove software updates. We patch our devices as soon as possible, and we do very periodic releases of our software, and that's how we try to get along. And also, we have a very good incident response team. So if we detect something that's happening in the field, we take care of it promptly.
Very good. Very good. Well, we are just about out of time. I want to keep things on track. Respect everybody's time, but I think we have time for maybe a question or two before we have to cut off here. Any? None? All right.
Go ahead.
Hi. So I work doing general IoT pen testing, but am definitely interested in medical device pen testing. What would you suggest are some good resources for me to learn? What are the requirements for performing that testing, and like next steps for me to get into that industry?
Sure. So in terms of requirements, the FDA pre-market cybersecurity guidelines that was published recently, a final draft, is a good place to look. I think a lot of the bug classes that they discussed there, you're very familiar with. I think a key piece in being very good at assessing medical devices is having a team or being an individual that's really good with a wide variety of technologies. You're starting to expand into web, cloud, mobile, and also embedded. And if you look at the big flaws that are identified, sometimes it involves all of these. It could be, dumping a chip, figuring out no digital signature verification, and finding a web flaw or cloud flaw, getting code execution there to cause effect on a wide variety of OTA. So I think, there's a lot of good resources out there. I like the awesome hacking GitHub that you can drop down and look at a wide variety of different hacking topics.
So the FDA guidance for cybersecurity, the draft was out in 2022, but Meltem, you mentioned you've been with Intuitive for 6 years now, and this is also a question for Michael. How has the new guidance from the FDA actually changed how manufacturers and health systems are addressing cybersecurity?
I think I can answer this question in one sentence. Cybersecurity was an afterthought before. Right now, when designing new projects, we get involved from the very first design process.
Yeah, and it's definitely going a step in the right direction, right? So my team, right, we've validated or applied controls to, over 170,000 devices. And those are majority of devices that were already in the environment. So we're having to go back and apply those controls or validate stuff that's already connected, right? So the idea that these controls are happening before it gets in the environment is really exciting to see, right? It makes our job easier, right? When we look at our controls, that gap is hopefully bridged with that new FDA guidance. So we're really hoping, as the newer devices come in with those controls already applied, theoretically there's less work that we have to do to make the device safer. So
I could listen to these guys talk well into the evening, but please join me in thanking our esteemed panel.